Studio International has come to the Alan Cristea Gallery to talk to the painter Ben Jonson. This is his second exhibition at this gallery, comprising 5 new paintings of half-real, half-imagined interiors. Born in Wales, a graduate of the Royal College of Art, Jonson has been making extraordinary hyper-real paintings for around 4 decades. We asked him about his new work. You did a residency at the National Gallery.
Yes, it wasn't the full-blown residency, it was just a 6-week experience. Yeah.
And when you were there, I saw that you went up onto the roof and you found an uncanny resemblance to a Canaletto painting.
Yes.
And then you went down back into your studio and you did this sort of alchemy of geometry on the canvas. And you have also said that all things begin with you with a pencil and a ruler. Is this the case with these new paintings as well?
No, I think that the experience at the National Gallery changed the way I looked at my own work and my own working process. What is happening in this room, in this gallery, is a series of reactions to very powerful experiences, and they were experiences that were quite surprising. I went to Berlin to admire the work of David Chipperfield, who'd recently done a conservation restoration job on the Neues Museum. And I found I spent no time looking at David Chipperfield, I spent time looking at the museum. And the other big and significant difference was that I realized I didn't actually like the museum as a piece of architecture, but I was moved by the experience of being there and what the walls were saying to me. And I realized that I was no longer the person that celebrated architecture, but I used architecture as a stimulus. And then the other painting that's in this show, one other painting that's in the show, is from a room where somebody was assassinated in Mexico. And it was the experience of the room telling you hidden messages of death and violence. So the National Gallery almost brought an end to my celebrating architecture, but the beginning of me recognizing how powerful buildings are and the way that a building can tell you a rich history.
So tell us about the room in Mexico. Which is that painting?
So this is the room in Mexico. It's now a museum, but it was the house of a leader of the revolution. He was opposed to the government at the time. The government found out that he was storing ammunition within the house, and they decided to assassinate him. And one night, 400 police and army turned up, and he was shot in front of his family. So what we have on the wall are not just little bits of decay, these are the bullet holes, and there are 47. And I've really treated this painting as a scene of crime representation, and each of these bullet holes is very carefully presented or represented so that one could almost read the position of the marksman that fired that bullet. And the chairs are in this terrible state because they were shot by bullets as well.
Is this room in a museum? It looks as if it's a room.
The room has become a museum, the whole house.
Did you make it a museum or
No, this plinth, this stage, is part of the way that the museum is now displayed.
And did you go there and visit it?
Oh yes, I went in it. Yes, everything I do is based on my own experience.
Right.
And then what happens is I go back to the studio and I reflect on the experience. And if I believe that there is more to be discovered, I then start the process of drawing. So
how do you draw?
I will sketch, often just with a pencil on paper, but once I've made the final decision that a painting will come out of this exploration, I then start working on computer. And the reason I work on computer is because I need a file, a drawing, which is intelligent and can speak to a cutter, which is in another part of the studio, because everything I do is sprayed through a stencil, or I now no longer spray. In fact, I use a sponge, I throw the paint on, so I'm still using a restriction through a stencil, but the process is much more, it's much more organic and less mechanical than when I used a spray gun. And then often I will then get sandpaper and I sand back into the surface so that you get underlying painting that may be from a month earlier coming through.
There's been a lot of development in your process. When you were at the Royal College, how did you go about making your
Yes,
works?
well, that was a long time ago, and it has been quite gradual in some ways, but between the Royal College and discovering architectural subject matter, there was a dramatic moment. The dramatic moment was I had an exhibition in New York, age 21. I'm having a grand opening in Madison Avenue. I'm very drunk, and I turn around and I see everybody looking at their drinks and nobody looking at the wall at all. I was so naive, I was angry about it. Not only was I angry, but for the first time I saw the work objectively, and what I realized is that I was using other people to lead me, and I wasn't being just led by them, I was copying them. So I was Max Beckmann meets George Grosz meets Francis Bacon. I was a German expressionist who lived in England, and it all looked like nonsense. I came back to England, I had 2 years' money, I rented a studio, and I exercised expressionism, and I remembered the experience of being in New York, a wonderful modern city, compared with London, a modern city. And I realized that I could bring a certain objectivity to my preoccupations, and my preoccupations underlying everything at that time would have been geometry, composition, rather formal concerns. So architecture became my subject matter. 2 years, I'd exercised Max Beckmann, buildings were appearing, and I was representing the work of great architects like Mies van der Rohe, Corbusier, Norman Foster, Jim Sterling. But with that discovery, I also needed a new language, and my language became, I suppose, realist, but not only realist, almost photorealist, a label that any photorealist hates.
Why? Why do they hate?
Because there is so much prejudice and it's so misleading. I hope that anybody that stands in front of any of these paintings will say, I didn't realize they'd be like this. I didn't realize it was paint on canvas. Also, many photorealists are preoccupied with the idea of an image. They are making a portrait of a photograph. A photograph is one small step towards the end product that I make.
A little earlier I said to you that these paintings are so extraordinary, their hyper-realism is almost a sort of optical illusion, which photography doesn't capture. In the flesh, these paintings seem to draw you towards them. But in a photograph, a photograph cannot somehow contain that.
We're talking about illusion,
yes.
I think,
Yeah.
And the playing with illusion is very important to me. I want paintings to attract people.
Yes.
I don't want to exclude people. I don't want people to feel they've had to have read a book on the theory behind the painting. But in doing that, I know that there's a danger that people only think the painting is about the subject matter. But I hope that I can arrest people for long enough for them to realize that the subject of the painting is me and my interaction with past experience and the craft of making a new object. And it's making this new object, which is my daily preoccupation. And any of these paintings can be from 3 months to 3 years. So it's a real commitment.
And you work with a team of people, is that right? Do you work with a number of people?
I will often work with a number of people. I will use whoever is necessary to make the final painting. I'm the only one that paints. I direct it all, but I recognize the significance and importance of the people that contribute to the painting. If we just look at this painting now, these chairs, I've explained that I work with stencils. For each one of these chairs, there are 38 stencils. The stencils go down one on top of another. The stencils are based on drawings, but the drawings result in a stencil here that could take 2 days for one person to weed, 16 hours to weed one stencil, and then you've got to multiply that by 38.
But initially what you have to do is, I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand this.
Yes.
You undo the whole thing backwards almost by drawing each stencil and then...
That's right.
Yes.
So each stencil has to be drawn. So that in itself is an act of concentration, and one could say meditation.
Yes. And you have to decide what layer
yes.
each bit of the object lies on.
Yes.
So you're slicing it through?
Yes. It's a deconstruction and then a reconstruction. So any object, any single element within the painting, for instance, a bullet hole, this bullet hole had 16 stencils. It's often from darkest to lightest, so the darkest goes down first, and then you build it up tone by tone by tone.
But do you also think of it as from back to front?
That's immaterial.
Okay.
But in fact, in the case of this vase, yes, the lightest part does happen to be on the surface of this vase urn, which is where the light is catching. So there is an element. And in fact, it's even a problem with some of these paintings, because I've had somebody come to me and say, you've stuck the chair on. And I think it's because the paint is so thick, because I'm building up layers of paint. So I then often have to repaint the edges to make sure that they're not catching the light. Do you know, this business of the technical aspect of the paintings, it's very difficult, because a lot of people are attracted to the painting, they get on with it, then they want to know how it's done, then they get lost, because it's very confusing. I can understand why some people might like to know, but also I can understand that some people are suspicious of, well, is it just a stuck-out photograph that you've collaged onto the surface? And one of the things that is so important to me is that what I do is I play with mud pies all day. I'm a kid. I get paint and I push it around the surface. What I'm trying to do is create an emotional response through concentration, meditation on an experience, and using raw materials to try to create that emotional response.
There's a lovely quote that I've heard you saying from Tennessee Williams, and you wanted to offer reality in the pleasant disguise of illusion.
Yes, I was loath to use that again, because every single talk I give, I feel I'm overdoing it, but it is a very, very important statement to me. And it's the narrator at the beginning of The Glass Menagerie, and he says, but I'm the opposite of the stage magician. The stage magician gives you illusion in the disguise of reality, but I'm here to give you reality in the pleasant disguise of illusion. And I deal with illusion because people like magic. People like to be fooled. People like to go into the picture. So using illusion and a very simple trick of perspective, which is 600 years old, I like to take people into a painting. I like to break down the reality of a flat surface. I mean, we all know. I mean, it's a solid board with paint on it. But people say, I could go right into that painting. I want to go down to the end and see what's there, and I want to go down to the corridor to the right and to the left. And often I will use things like light coming in from a window round this corner and coming across the floor, because it gives this suggestion that there is life outside the painting, outside this room. But I hope if people are arrested for long enough, they'll come to terms with the reality, which is it's paint and canvas, no more. But with words, we can move people. With colour, we can move people. An actor can change your life by having the skill to be absorbed and contained within the character they're creating.
I wanted to ask you about the last painting we saw, the painting in Mexico.
Yes.
It's an event that occurred within that internal space. And I wondered if you were moving towards an event in order to sort of side-skip this business of how it's done, how long it takes, blah, 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 all those things that maybe can snare people.
Do you mean have some a narrative?
Yes.
I think the narrative, yes, I think the narrative is legitimate territory even in a die-hard modernist nowadays.
Is that what you would say you
I
might
think
be?
my roots are certainly in the Bauhaus, in modernism, in constructivism, yes. But I'm maturing, I'm affected by my environment. Now we as artists have so much breadth to draw our inspiration from, and anybody can legitimately work in a number of different ways. I'm becoming more and more fascinated by the past as a way of establishing us in the present and as a means to evaluate where we might be going in the future. Right, so this is just a numbered guide to this painting. There is a much more elaborate drawing that's been made, but this breaks it into the different areas so that F2 is this section here, and it's just that I will then have colours mixed to that area, and also I will know that certain stencils will be there. But if we come down to this figure, which is F9R, and F9R sits just to the right of this doorway. I'll go through the stencils that made this up. This would have been the first stencil, and it gets sprayed through. Second stencil, third, fourth, and we're going from dark to light. Lighter section, lighter, lighter, and we're coming now very close to just the highlight areas. The light on the neck. Stencil 11, we're just getting down to the third from the brightest, second brightest, and then the highlight. This is an approximate guide for this capital, in fact this capital up here, and these little blocks each represent a stencil, so we have 1 to 20 stencils, but each stencil may be divided into 3 or 4 or 5 or just 2 or just one separate area, and I will cover up part of that stencil and not work through it, so that with this we'd end up with about 28 areas that are painted. The whole thing is repeated over and over again. However, whether it's a very small detail like this lamb, which is 4 stencils, here 20 stencils for this figure, we've dealt with that. This is just one nice big open area where there aren't lots of stencils, but I built it up using a sponge and then sanding back.